that how you see it?
No, that's not how I see it at all. I mean, it's going to take an awful lot to get these people out. I mean, what we saw today was essentially the same briefing that was given in 2003 by Donald Rumsfeld and General Richard Myers, when we launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. I mean, there was still no clear definition of the objectives. Now, Dan Kane did talk about destroying the ability to project power as a military objective, and that made a little bit of sense. But what we saw with Secretary of Defense was a tough, macho guy talking about killing and shamelessly sucking up to the POTUS. But he really wasn't giving any specifics on really what the long-term objectives are. And I would say that we're going to be in the same situation we were in Iraq. We're going to be able to knock out their defensive capabilities, their offensive capabilities, establish air superiority, but they're going to go underground. These are tough, resilient people. They're going to be able to outlast us. And if we think we're going to be able to bomb them into submission from the air, somebody's smoking something.
David Sanger, there were almost two briefings going on there, which is the same thing we saw the other day there. You have the briefing from the defense secretary, and you have the briefing from the chair of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane. And Dan Kane laid out methodically and very professionally, I think, what has been done so far and what will change from a military standpoint in the effort that he lays out clearly to destroy Iran's missiles, destroy Iran's navy, their fighting capability, and to make sure they can't rebuild their nuclear arsenal. Secretary Hegseth seems to have a bit of a different mission here that is much more political, appealing to the president's base and whatnot. But explain, if you can, what you continue to hear about the idea of regime change. Israel has made crystal clear it's trying to knock out Iranian leadership every day. Every day. That is a goal of theirs. And Secretary Hegseth wants to create some space there. So what did you see in that?
John, I think you've got it exactly right. There was a moment amid the bravado after he said the Iranians are toast and, other things like that, where he did say we are going to go out and hunt down all of their military leadership. And he seemed to suggest some of the political leadership, and frequently it's one and the same. But there was a moment where he veered off and he said that this wasn't going to be like Iraq. I'm just looking at my notes here. He said that it would be minus Paul Bremer and the nation building. Paul Bremer, of course, ran the American Provisional Authority in Iraq after the initial invasion, and that was clearly, a major failure. But what he didn't lay out is what the end state was supposed to look at. I mean, he essentially said, we're there to destroy. He said, we will do so without mercy. He made this sound as if it was a revenge set of killings. In fact, at one moment, he stopped to say that they hunted down and found those who had plotted an assassination attempt against President Trump. But he didn't at any moment say to the Iranian people, look, when this is done, what we're trying to do is create a free and democratic state, and it's up to you to go do this, or we will help you do this. That would have been the political objective. In fact, we really haven't heard that at all since the president's initial video just hours after all of this started, where he urged the Iranian people to rise up when this is over.
Nick Payton-Wall joining us as well. Nick, you were listening into this as well. One of the things we heard from Hegseth is he laid it out in a sports analogy about the playbooks and how that Iran had a pre-planned playbook and then they're in the middle of it and they don't know what play to call. What did you hear in that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it kind of tallies with what we were hearing indeed from senior Iranian officials in the opening hours of all of this, that there was something they referred to as a decentralized command mosaic or defense mosaic, where they'd essentially given different units independent instructions prior to the conflict, i.e. prior to the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei here. And I think that is potentially suggesting that there was a in the event of this occurring break glass type plan, which was followed out in those first days, that maybe while we saw such an extraordinary array of retaliation across the entire region, often against nations that were not pro-US or Israeli intervention here, and then Mr. Hegseth is sort of saying, well, we seem now to be getting to the point where that is done, and they are perhaps either struggling to adapt or adapting perfectly well and have still command and control. General Kane not quite so specific when asked as to how command and control were functioning at this particular point. But that is particularly interesting because it may indeed suggest that we've seen that first kind of all-out response that Iran fired because of the killing of Khamenei, and we may be entering into a different, potentially more adaptive phase, if indeed there are still enough commanders around calling the shots in a unified fashion, with importantly somebody at the top having a political reflection on quite what the best course ahead is. Remember, we still do not have a replacement for the supreme leader, and in a society as autocratic as Iran, that's pretty key at a time like this. One other point I did here, which may inform what we see in the days ahead, was the suggestion that we're now down 73% of the number of attack drones, one-way attack drones, the Shahids, the kind of singular fire and forget drones that don't direct themselves on their way, but are kind of given a target and then land. They've been causing havoc across the region, particularly in the early days. They're incredibly hard to stop if they're in large waves. The very expensive, sophisticated defenses of many of the Gulf states, it's sort of spending millions of dollars of taking out one of these things that may cost like $30,000 to put in the sky. So that's a key issue. If they're dropping the number they're firing, is that because their stocks are low, or are they getting better at working out how to evade defenses at this particular point? But it does also suggest, along with the point you heard about a switch potentially from smart munitions to dumb munitions, stand-in procedures, that we're at a point of American superiority here in the air. That will potentially inform the timeline of how many more targets they choose to go for, and we're also getting an indication maybe that the Iranians are seeing their inventories lower. That doesn't say that we're into closing stages here, far from it. The bravado of here was aimed to definitely project maximum leverage if there is any negotiation process to be had at all, but it gives you an idea as to whether or not we might see 4 or 5 weeks here, or quite where we're looking in terms of the timing of all of this.
Just some statistics that Nick was talking about there that I think are worth repeating. That General Kane said that drone strikes are down more than 70% from the first day, that missile strikes are down 80%, more than 80% from the first day, including more than 20% in just the last 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to at least change things potentially on the ground in places where those missiles and drones can hit, which includes where Nick Robertson is, a place that has been hit, and the embassy in danger there and closed. I do want to ask you, Nick, what you heard when it came to Americans trying to leave the region. You are in a place where the embassy has been closed. We heard from General Kane that they had opened some space up on C-17s to try and help folks get out, but many Americans are still stranded. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, one of the difficulties is for American citizens who are not living in Saudi Arabia, living in other parts of the Gulf, to actually get here to Saudi, because the airspace from Riyadh, from Jeddah in the west of the country remains open. We know that the embassy here is trying to work as it can with American citizens, both in Saudi and in the region. The details are really yet to fully emerge on that. What did come across to me that I find significant in what we heard from General Kane and Pete Hegseth there was some of the specifics about how the Gulf states are responding. And this is critical and key to whether or not, or how much this current conflict escalates as it sort of descend into chaos. General Kane spoke about Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all sort of using their defensive missile capabilities, and how that sort of improved the effect of being able to intercept the missiles and drones that are being fired. But he used a word that I found very, very interesting, particularly as countries like Saudi Arabia try to gauge how they should respond to Iran's attacks. He spoke about restraint. And he almost sort of seemed to commend that restraint. And it's not clear as the White House, really requesting of their allies and partners in the region. And as General Kane pointed out, this is a war that many of those partners, Saudi Arabia among them, did not want. They did not want a chaotic war that threatens their economy. And it was interesting that he pointed that out as well. So, commending, it appeared, their restraint. For the United States and Israel perhaps to have a clearer shot so that it doesn't completely escalate. But that was a very, very important point. The other detail we learned there that we hadn't heard previously is that Saudi Arabia's energy facilities in the east, meaning here the oil facilities, were targeted by ballistic missiles that were taken down, intercepted by Patriot missile interceptor systems. It is significant in the Saudis' assessment of how much Iran escalates that they use ballistic missiles. We didn't get a date on that, but I think the real determining factor in this part of the world, when they hear the statistics about the reduction of the number of missiles fired from the first day or so, the question is, does Iran have command and control? And the sense here is that they do still, to a measure. And therefore the question becomes, okay, there was a reduction in the missiles fired, yes, but is that because Iran is intending to fight this longer? Pete Hegseth talking about 4, 6, 8, even or maybe 3 weeks, he said. Is Iran now downscaling the number of missiles that it fires a day, factoring in a longer campaign? That's a question that gets asked here.
Yeah, we simply don't know the answer to that right now, whether they stop firing as much because they're running out or because they're saving some for later. Dana Stroul, I want to bring you into this because Secretary Heskus began the entire briefing by said the United States, he believes, is winning decisively. And then as Kate laid out there, he said that the Iranian Navy has been destroyed, the Air Force has been destroyed. But then he said it's not mission accomplished and they've only just begun. It's a little bit of a conflicting message there, a mixed message there, as we see sort of the conflict spreading. We have an Iranian naval vessel sunk in the Indian Ocean. That may be what we saw off the coast of Sri Lanka, pretty far away from the Gulf there. We see Cyprus, the United States suggesting that U.S. embassy officials leave Cyprus because there are concerns about attacks there, and in Pakistan, in Lahore and Karachi, embassy officials being told to leave as well. So do you see this as something that's getting wider or maybe more narrowly focused over the skies of Iran?
It's definitely getting wider. So first of all, with respect to Iran, what's remarkable, and I agree with what we heard from General Kane and Secretary Hegseth, within 48 hours, Israel and the United States together had air supremacy over Iran. And what they're doing now is a race against time to get out destroy as much of that missile program, all elements of the Iranian missile program and the drones. So the production facilities, the storage facilities, the launchers, everything before the air defense of the region gives out. And it's very clear that the rate of attacks, as you mentioned with the percentages, has gone down.